Hello and welcome everyone. In this episode we're going to be talking about arrays. I know I talked about arrays in the past and never really got into them, and now we're going to do that. So arrays in Java are usually a way to collect similar objects. Now that's not really a rule for them. It could contain a bunch of different random unrelatable things, but when you're using arrays in Java, they usually have a relationship between different items. And what I mean by that is you have an array. Array stores multiple things, multiple bits of information. And this could, for example, if we're talking about stuff that's relatable, it could be different car brands or different music genres. Those all have a relationship to each other, but, let's say rap and rock, those are two different things, but they relate because they have to do with music. So you could kind of think of arrays as a grouping of similar things or similar objects. I prepared a visual to show how kind of arrays work, so let's switch over to Paint. And yes, my lovely writing and whatever is back with this drawing tablet, but hopefully you can read this. In the top left it says Indices. You could kind of think of an index or these indices as ways to sort of give like a special indicator to an item in an array. So, let's say you have 10 elements in an array, right? Elements being, let's say like, car brand. So one could be like a Mustang. Let's say you want to access the bit of information that represents Mustang. You need to reference sort of a special identifier to access that bit of information. And these indices, they act sort of as a special representation of a slot in an array. So here you can see this first box, which has nothing in it. There's nothing in our array right here, right now. Starts with 0. So it's very important. This is a very common part that a lot of beginners, trip up on, is they forget indexes when working with arrays start at 0 and not 1. So really the first element in an array is the 0th index. So if you want it to refer to this element right here, whatever that may be in the future, right now, like I said, there's nothing in it, you would have to refer to the 0 index. So let's say we're storing numbers just to make it basic. We'll store 10. Maybe I should use the pen. Next we'll store 20. Oh boy. 30. 40. Man, this thing. 50. 60. 70. 80. 90. And the last one, 100. Alright. So we're storing 10 to 100, skipping 10 every time. So when we reference a 0 index, that has a value of 10. So we could be like, you know what, I want to access the first element in this array. We know the first element in the array is represented by the 0th index. So that's the way we can access that specific value. Same with, let's say we wanted to access the number 60, the value 60 right here. We would want to go and utilize the 5th index, which represents 60, and that will get us this bit of information. So indexes, just special indicators of different values in an array. And that's all it is. The key thing to remember is your indexes start at 0, not at 1. So if you try to access the first index and you put 1, you're going to actually get the second value in the array. But it is worth noting that, you start at 0, but the length of the array is actually 10. Since you start at 0, your max index is always going to be 1 less than the length of the array. So the length of the array here is 10, because you can see we have 10 elements. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And since the max index is 1 less than the length of the array, max index will be 9, which is right here. So really not that bad. I would take a moment to sort of dissect this and make sure you understand it, because if you really get this image, then you really probably get arrays. The only thing that you would then need to catch up on is just how to utilize them, how to actually refer to the syntax in Java and things like that. Before we do a couple examples of that, I just want to state some advantages and disadvantages of arrays. Arrays are great because, number one, they're easy to use and you can access individual values. And that accessing individual values is like accessing just 60 or just 80 inside of this by referring to their related index. A disadvantage is that arrays can only contain elements of the same type. So for example, let's say these numbers in here are integers, right? You can't store a different data type other than integers in this array. Once you make it one type, and you actually have to declare it as that type when you make the array in code, I can't, like, for instance, change one of these to a string value. I can't have, like, 10, 20, 30, and then, like, have this right here be 40 in text. That doesn't work. That's two different types, and that's the problem. Another disadvantage is its size is immutable. So once you make an array, you give it a size, whether, explicitly or it's implied through how many elements you give it. There's a few ways to make arrays, and we'll go through that in a minute. Once you give it a size, though, that size can't be changed. If you give an array length of 10 values, so 10 spots, and then you're like, wait, I need 12, you have to make a whole new array, or you have to rechange the array when you first create it to be a size of 12 and not 10. You can't add on or subtract additional slots. You technically can use less slots. You're still going to have the same size of an array, so like I could technically set 8 and 9 here to be nothing. They still exist, but they won't have a value in it. But that's not really how you should do it. That's use of unnecessary, computer resources. But let's actually talk about using them in code. So here we go. Let me move this tablet over to the side. Alright, so we got several ways we can really declare an array in Java. I'm going to be using integers and strings as an example. So first, an integer, and you might have caught on to this. I think I even said it when I was talking about your main function, but that bracket right there, that's the indicator that this is an array. So you want to do int array using these brackets. Then you want to give it a name. So I'll name it my int array, remember in camel case. And then I'm going to do new int, and then brackets here, 3. So let's talk about this real quick. First, like I said, you declare that this array is going to hold integers. That means it could only hold integers, nothing else. You specify its array by putting these brackets after your data type. You give it a name. Right now, we're setting it equal to a size of 3, which is specified right here. In this case, we're not storing any values yet. We're just creating an empty integer array with 3 empty spaces. So let's say we have 3 spaces. What are the indexes for it? There's an index 0, index 1, index 2. And those are representing the 3 spaces, the size of this array. If I was to do the same thing with a string, really just replacing integer with string. String array equals new string. Boom. Very similar, like I said, instead of int, you're doing string. Now, another way to do it is actually give it values. For instance, starting off the same way, int array, my int array equals, and then I can just do curly brackets and then specify the elements. So let's get rid of these real quick. So here, we don't give it a size. The size is implied by the elements we provided. So here, it's actually storing the number 1, the number 2, the number 3. And by how do we declare it, that means there's a size of 3 because we're storing 3 elements. If I was to go ahead and put 4, that's 4 elements. So here we're implying the size by the number of elements in the array that we're providing. And this array, when we create it, is actually going to hold values. So only thing different here is really just this side of the array. You have the same beginning, declare it's an integer, declare it's an array, give it a name, and then here inside of curly brackets, we give the values separated by commas. So if we have a size of 4, what's the max index? Max index is 1 minus the size, so it's 3. So the number 1 is represented by the 0th index, number 2 is the first index, number 3, second index, number 4, third index. Now if I was to do it with a string, again, very similar to how I just did it with integer, I can go ahead and let's do letters in the alphabet, A, B, C. So here, instead of storing numbers like we are up here, we're storing strings. We have 3 elements. The string A, the string holding B, and the string holding C. So A is represented by the 0th index, B is represented by the first index, and C is represented by the second index. Size of 3, so the max index is 2. Now before we end the video, I want to real quick cover some of the things I talked about earlier in this video and show you how you actually do it with code. For example, we talked about indexes. How can we use these indices, these indexes, to access this particular value in an array? So, for example, if we wanted to print out the second element in my int array, we would obviously first declare our print statement, and then we would reference the name of the array we want to use, which is my int array, followed by brackets, which represent it being an array, and then inside these brackets is where we pass in the index we want to grab. So if we want to print out the second value in my int array, which is 2, that is represented by the index 1 because we start at 0. So if I go ahead and print this out, you can see that 2 is printed out down here, which is exactly what it should. If I switch this to 2, it'll print out 3 because the second index is 3. 0, 1, 2. Now let's say I printed out 3 here, which is doesn't exist in this array. Remember, the highest index in this is 2. There is no index 3. It will give you an out of bounds exception, which right here, and that's basically telling you it doesn't exist. There is no index 3. And we could do the same thing for the string array. So let's change this to string. And this should print out C, correct? Because C is represented by the second index. Print it out. Prints out C. I know that might be a little small for you guys, but hopefully you guys can see it. Last thing I just want to briefly cover, which we actually did in our last video with for loops, is how you can access and print out each element in an array sort of in one loop in one cycle. So first I will set my starting condition, which is I equal to 0. I will do while I is less than my int array dot length, and that's the same as saying the length of my int array, which is 3. So that's as long as I is less than 3, and then we add 1 to I each time. Now since I starts at 0 and goes until it equals the length of my int array and adds 1 every time, we can use I as the index because it'll start at 0 and it'll go through each index value until there aren't any anymore. So if I go ahead and do system.out.println my int array, and then inside the brackets this time I put I, every time it'll print out the next element until it hits the max length of the array. So for example, it starts out at 0. 0 is less than 3. goes in, prints out the 0th index, which is 1. Next time through, I is 1 because we added 1 to it. 1 is less than 3. Prints out the first index, which is 2. Next time through, I is 2. 2 is less than 3. The second index in, or index 2 in my int array is 3. Next time through, 3 is not less than 3, and we exit out. So that's a great way to go ahead and cycle through in an array. So if we run it, we'll print out 1, 2, 3, which is each element in this array. Let's say I switch this to the string. It'll print out ABC. ABC. There you go. And of course, there's more ways to play with arrays. You can use the array to set a new value to it. So something like my string array I equals D. And then let's say I took this out, right? And then let's copy it, and then in the next one we'll print it out. So we'll do what we have in the last for loop print, and then we'll do my string array I. All the elements should be D. So what it's going to do is each time it goes through here, it's going to set that element from what it is to D. So the first index or the 0th index is going to be set to D. Same with B. Same with C. So you should see all D's being printed out. D, D, D. So yes, you can use that explicitly, implicitly, whatever, to change values in the array as well. But yeah, so that's really arrays, the basics of them, of course. In our next video, I believe we'll be talking about functions, and then we'll follow that up with classes probably. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned. Thanks.